The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, First Robotics community. My name is Sean Lim, and I'm the Director of District Implementation for First Robotics Canada. And welcome to our final installment of the Ask the Experts webinar series. And for our final episode, we will be recapping both the World Championship events, both the one at Houston and in St. Louis. And we're going to give a quick synopsis on how our Canadian teams did and a little bit of a performance review because for those of you who had a chance to see those events, we had a watershed year from our Canadian teams where I think we basically outperformed any other performance that we've had in the past and broke a whole bunch of expectations and even records. But joining us, we've got a great panel of guests with us this evening. And we have a bunch of mentors and coaches from some of the teams which were a direct result of this amazing Canadian performance. And the first member of the panel we have on with us is Rishi Jotsinghani, who was the drive coach for FRC Team 3683. That is Team Dave out of Waterloo. And Team Dave was one of our three Einstein semifinalists. So they made it to the final field, pretty much to the finals of the finals of the World Championships. An incredible experience. But Rishi, great to have you on board. How are you doing this evening, Rishi?
I'm feeling great. Thanks so much.
Awesome to have you on board. We also have with us drive coach Parth Patel from FRC Team 610, who was a division finalist on Darwin and a member of one of our more interesting alliances because it comprised of three Canadian teams between 1114, 610, and the DiscoBot 6387, with the fourth member of that alliance being the Hawaiian kids. But Parth, glad to have you on board with us. How are you doing this evening?
Very well. I'm happy to be back in Canada and resting, as it were.
Well, we're glad to have you back as well, Parth. And our third member on our panel is Craig Chambers, who is a design and strategy mentor from FRC Team 4976, the Rebels. And for those of you listening from outside of Ontario, maybe not a team that you may recognize as much as the 610s or the 3683s of the world, but for those of us in Ontario, we definitely know that the Rebels have been one of our elite teams this year. And the Rebels themselves were also division finalists at the World Championships. And we're glad to have you on board. Craig, how are you doing this evening?
Also glad to be back in Canada. Unfortunately, back to work today, but definitely feeling good about the week that we spent down in St. Louis.
Awesome. And last but not least, we have joining us from FRC Team 2056, strategy mentor Sumeet Kler. Sumeet, you guys had a pretty eventful World Championships as well, carrying the torch for the Canadian squad, making it the furthest with 1241 as part of that alliance, right to Einstein as well. Just missing out on the Einstein finals. But Sumeet, glad to have you with us. How are you doing this fine evening?
Doing great. Just trying to rest up from that last week.
And a well-deserved rest nonetheless. But before we get into sort of sharing some of the stories and anecdotes from our panelists, I wanted to take a moment just to look at some of the data for just how good the Canadian teams did at the World Championships this year. And so I'm the type of guy who maybe when I say things which are pretty positive, it's a little more important to back it up with some numbers. And so in my role as a director here at First Robotics Canada, I was charged with producing just a very quick report on how our teams did. And I put together a list of all the teams who made it to the playoffs, how far they made it in the playoffs, where they were selected in the draft orders, and also whether or not they won any awards, and last but not least, where they ranked in terms of the qualification rounds at the end of it. And after compiling this list and just running some very, very simple statistics on it, we came to some really, really interesting numbers where we outperformed a lot of interesting metrics. So first of all, we sent 43 teams to the World Championships this year, to both Houston and St. Louis. excuse me, and of those 43 teams, a whopping over 60% of them made the playoffs. And just as a baseline, of all the teams at championships, regardless of where you're from, the baseline number is about 48% should make it to the playoffs, and we outperformed by a pretty significant margin. And that percentage actually gets even more extreme as they went through the playoff rounds, making it to the semis. We didn't lose quite half our teams, and so we outperformed there as well. And by the time we made it to the finals of the division, this is going to sound crazy to say, but more than a quarter of all the Canadian teams at the World Champs made it to the finals of their division. More than a quarter of them. And of course, when we hit Einstein, this year, a couple of us were disappointed to see that a lot of our Canadian teams just couldn't quite get past that finalist barrier, but we did have a good number of teams still make it to Einstein, where we still outperformed the baseline metric, where 6% of teams should make it on Einstein. Of all our Canadian teams, we were closer to 7%, so we were still able to outperform there, despite the fact that some of us might have felt disappointed that we saw so many of our finalist teams get eliminated. But what gets even crazier is even before the playoff rounds happened, when we looked at the qualification rankings and who ended up ranked in the top 10 in their divisions, more than 30% of all Canadian teams made it into the top 10 ranking-wise, which, that's another statistic which is just a little crazy. We walked away with, in total, 18 awards from our Canadian teams, winning them at a rate of about 0.42 per team, with the baseline being, there's about 0.37 awards available per team at the competition. And so for Canadian teams as a whole, really, really outstanding performance, way, way, way better than the baseline average metrics by a substantial portion. And of course, being that most of us are in Ontario, of those 43 teams, 34 of them were actually from Ontario. Many of us were also curious to see how the Ontario teams did, also because we actually did go through this crazy thing called the district model transition this year. And some of us had thought that, well, if we were doing things properly, we should see an increase in our performance from our teams. And the numbers seem to indicate that Ontario did pretty well at the World Championships as well, with almost 3/4 of the Ontario teams making it to the playoffs, almost a third of them advancing to the finals, and more than a third of them ranking in the top 10 at the end of qualification rounds. And so I don't know if we've ever seen numbers quite this impressive from our contingent going to the World Championships, but in prior webinars, you may have heard me say that I think we were going to send our strongest contingent ever out of Canada to the World Championships. These numbers look pretty good to me in that we may have done exactly that. And so just a quick synopsis on what the numbers looked like. But aside from the numbers, what's a little bit more interesting, though, is maybe to hear from some of our panelists about some of the stories that took place behind these numbers. And one of the very first things whenever I'm talking about the World Championships, especially amongst our Canadian teams, the first topic that comes up is always, who made it to Einstein. And we had 3 phenomenal teams make it to Einstein, and we have panelists from 2 of them on the call with us today who might be able to give us a little bit of insight. But on Einstein, we had 2056, 1241, and 3683 all make it to the big show. And for those 3 teams, there's some interesting storylines here. And so the first one that I think I'd like to delve into is probably dealing more so with the first alliance, 2056 and 1241, who got onto an alliance together. And 2056 ranked first in the Curie division and subsequently chose 1241 with their first overall pick. And when that happened, I guess I'll be almost brutally honest here. I was a little surprised by that, because if I rewind a few weeks ago to the Ontario District Championships, where 2056 again was the #1 alliance captain, and how the picks unfolded there, 1241 was not the first overall pick. And in fact, it took until the 7th alliance, basically 7 picks in, until they were selected. And so this was a little bit of a surprise to me. And I was maybe hoping, Sumeet, if you might be able to give us a little bit of insight. I don't think that pick was a surprise to you guys, but can you tell us maybe just a little bit behind, the rationale behind picking up 1241 as your first overall pick?
Yeah, for sure. So 1241, they were, after scouting all throughout the qualification matches, from our data, we were able to see that they were the best gearing team in our entire division. So just based off that would indicate us that we should pick them. They also had one of the most consistent autonomous modes and hanging performances, which are two very vital things that you need on your alliance. And then other than quantitative stuff, we knew going in, not to get ahead of ourselves, but that we would have to do something more on Einstein than just do our normal cycling. And we knew we'd have to get creative. And to us, because we had known 1241 and we had seen what they had done at the Ontario districts to where they had been the 1114 Alliance, we knew they are able to do some creative things. And we wanted that on our alliance when we had to go up against the winners of all the other divisions, which also played a small factor into our decision making, but the major overall factor was that our data supported them as the best team to pick at that moment for our alliance.
Yeah, and I would say the conversation pretty much could end the moment that you said that they were the best gearing robot. If that was all that went into your decision, full stop, that totally justifies it right then and there. But speaking to the other intangibles that you're talking about with 1241, I've had the pleasure, along with Parth here, to have been a part of that 2013 World Championship Alliance with 1241 and 610, and 1241 was the alliance captain there, so there's no replacement for experience being out on Einstein. But that alliance was dependent on teams just working like synergistically on the field, not taking up the same spots, just going in and out of different areas of the field at the exact right moments in time without having to micromanage, just kind of intuitively knowing. And 1241 has definitely demonstrated that. And I have to say, one of the most impressive plays that I saw from this alliance, 2056 1241 alliance, was I guess it was a move called the hang block, where 1241, basically prevented a hang, right at the very, very, very end of the match, which is a really gutsy thing to do. But, not only you're providing huge gear support, but if you can push that limit to hanging at the very, very end of a match and create that 50-point differential, like if you look at the Einstein matches, almost every match in the eliminations was decided by less than the value of a climb. So if 1241 gets theirs but can play defense for long enough to hold up their partners, like that's a game-breaking move right then and there. And that's not something that you can really scout for because you're probably not going to be doing a whole lot of that in qualifications. But if you know that there's a team that has that in their back pocket, darned if you're not going to take a good long hard look at them. So Sumeet, was that hang block in the cards or something that you guys knew about or even had discussed prior to pulling it out?
Surprisingly, it was actually a gear block. They stopped the last gear from going up on that alliance. But no, that was completely out of the blue. They noticed it at the right moment, and they ran for it, and it worked out in our favor.
Awesome. Well, we'll come back to that alliance a little bit because there's more to talk about on Einstein when we're going to talk about the different strategies that the different alliances ran. But I want to swing over now to Rishi from Team Dave 3683. And Rishi, I kind of want to get your perspective from Einstein because I think my perspective was when the alliances came together, there were a few alliances where I looked at, a few Canadian alliances and said, oh yeah, these guys have a really, really strong shot at making Einstein. And, I don't want to sound brutally honest, but Rishi, you probably know me for a number of years that sometimes, I can be. But the Team Dave alliance was a little bit under the radar, but I say that in the most positive way possible because, again, I'm going to share some of my 2013 experience with 610. We were an alliance where there were zero expectations of us. We had like the lowest OPR of like literally combined OPR of like all the alliances and all the eliminations across all the divisions, and no one expected anything from us. And we ended up winning the World Championships because there were no expectations. Like we played every match as the underdogs. We had nothing to lose. And so it was easy for us to just leave everything on the table, which I think is a little different than maybe what the 2056 1241 alliance, in terms of their expectations were. But from your standpoint with your alliance, was there any element of that when you guys put your alliance together and made your journey towards Einstein?
Oh, for sure. So being the fourth alliance, it was definitely, we were not expected to win that field. Not even close. Our biggest herd was going to be the first alliance with 469 and 148. So we went into that knowing that if we get past that alliance, then we have accomplished something huge. So there wasn't too much stress after that. Once we did that, we kind of felt that we would be somewhat guaranteed to get to Einstein, and that alone was just like an amazing feeling.
So I have to ask, Rishi, when you put that alliance together, you know, you guys beat the number one alliance. Like you were giant killers in very much that sense. 469 Los Gorillas, you know, they've won a world championship. 148 has won multiple championships. You know, what was the strategy for your alliance in order to take out an alliance like that?
So going into Friday night, we knew that the top ranked robots were all gear robots, and that they were going to straight up look for someone who could finish that 40 kPa, because at this point, four rotors kind of became a requirement. But we knew that we weren't going to get picked in those top three, and our goal was to become that fourth alliance and kind of focus purely on gears of defense, with maybe throwing in a couple low goals to beat the other all-gear alliances. So going into it, the first alliance had 148, who was a lights-out shooter, but we knew that if we could pop all the hoppers because of their lack of ball intake, finish the four rotors as fast as possible, and stop their four rotors, or at least stop a climb, we had the win in our pockets, and we were able to stop four rotors both times.
Amazing. And so, you know, this had been a strategy that a lot of us, especially in Ontario, had been talking about on whether we could successfully pull it off or not. And it sounds like you guys were just focused on it, executed it, and, you know, it got you a spot on Einstein. Now, having said that, that strategy on Einstein maybe played a little bit into how you guys ended up ranking on Einstein. And this is kind of one also, you know, I'm going to swing this back to you, Sumeet, as well, but because Sumeet, the 2056-1241 strategy on Einstein, I think it was a little bit more traditional, where you lean very heavily on 2056's shooting capabilities and getting that 40 kPa, if not more, and the four rotors. But we saw some alliances on Einstein which had two shooters on them, who were able to maybe more comfortably run up their kPa scores, even at the risk of, you know, not being quite as good on the four gears. But we saw something very interesting happen on Einstein, where basically the top four teams, I can't even remember how many teams there were. Actually, I can look this up. But the top few teams on Einstein, they were all tied with 3-2 records, the same number of championship points. And so how it works is there's a round-robin tournament with the 6 teams on Einstein, and the top 2 were the only 2 selected to play in the finals. And because they all had tied records, they had to use the first tiebreaker, which is the number of match points, the sum of all of your points scored on Einstein, in order to figure out who are the top 2 ranked teams. And so maybe I can swing this one over to you, but you know, I was really gunning for 2056 to try and place into those first 2 ranked positions in order to get a finals berth on Einstein, but it just felt like maybe the strategies and the composition of the teams were tilted more in the favor of certain strategies because of that tiebreaker situation. But how did you guys feel about that, Sumeet? Is that something that might have come up as you guys were going through the process?
Yeah, so we knew going into Einstein that we wouldn't have the highest shooting alliance when there's alliances like 254s and titaniums out there. So we originally had some crazy ideas on how we would overcome those, which I can brush past later. But to get back to your point about how the match points played into effect, after we lost our second match, lost our third match, we realized that the only way we would be able to make it into the final 2 alliances would be to get the most match points. So from there, our strategy shifted to instead of getting 4 rotors and playing defense, it would be 4 rotors and ball until you drop to get as many match points as we possibly could to bring that higher and higher. And unfortunately, we were about 111 points short. But that's just how it ended up going.
Yeah, and that's a tricky situation because your strategy was 4 rotors, get your 40 KPA, and then play defense to try and stop those 4 rotors or even additional KPA. Like that was your textbook strategy. That's what you guys had constructed to win this tournament. And
then we had some few crazy ideas. Like at one point we were considering taking one of our 4th pick and remodeling them a little bit so they'd be able to climb over a barrier and block 2 pegs at once, which is a crazy strategy that we really wanted to implement. Unfortunately, due to hardware limitations and time limitations, we weren't able to do it. But I think that would have been a crazy strategy that would have amazed everyone on Einstein and would have had a pretty awesome effect, in my opinion, because it would block two pegs, leave one open, and you wouldn't have to worry about any blockading fouls because there's just one robot in the end.
And of course, that would have been a pretty effective strategy if you're asking me. That would have resulted in a lot more wins versus losses. But it's such a weird situation though, in that you have that many teams tied with the same record, and you got to go to that tiebreaker, where the advantage was given to basically teams with 2 shooters who could just continue to run up the score. And if you look at it, the alliances that ultimately ended up in that 1st and 2nd position were ones with 2 legitimate shooters who could continue to run up the scores. And so, I used to always say when we won Einstein in 2013, so much of it depends on luck to a certain extent. It
really does.
To end up, in a situation with that many tied records, there's not much more you can say to that. Where, you guys even made the right adjustment, which was to switch your strategy and to try and play maybe not to what was your strength, but to play to what you needed to do in order to win. And how close you guys were. I remember watching semis match 14 and with you guys scoring 504 points and looking at the match points and just sort of saying, well, you guys mathematically have actually a pretty good chance as long as, these last 2 alliances stay under, it was something like 496 points for the guys which were there. And of course, these guys go out and they probably both know that it's in their best interest just to run up the scores and not play any defense. And, that's precisely what they did as well. And, who can blame them, because they're trying to make Einstein finals too. And they put up these massive scores of 530 plus for both of them. So you can't blame them. And
exactly.
And again, Rishi, even for you guys, this is even more extreme for you guys because you did not depend on shooting KPA points at all. Like, if you guys were in that situation, I know your record was 2-3, so that didn't put you in that tiebreaker situation, but you had some unique perspective being on Einstein, just kind of knowing that your strategy, might not have been ideal for that first tie or for that tiebreaker, right? So you would probably agree with everything that Sumeet said as well, if you could.
Oh, for sure. Like we went into it knowing that we were the one of 2 alliances who didn't have any like high volume shooters, to say the least. So it was just trying to make something out of nothing for the most part. Yeah, I feel like we did.
Well, for sure. I wanted to take one last moment to congratulate you guys for your amazing performance out there. Canada, Team Canada, as I like to call it, because that's what happens when we get teams going up to Einstein, is super proud of all 3 of you. And, we feel honored that you guys were able to represent the entire country there. And you certainly did us really, really proud. So huge thanks and congratulations to you guys. But I did also want to take a moment to shine the spotlight on some of our finalists as well, where there were some really interesting storylines that emerged with all the teams that ended up making it to the finals. And just to give them a quick shout out, that would have been 11-14, 6-10, 49-76, 49-17, 49-46, 46-78, 63-87, a rookie team who made it all the way to the finals, and 8-65. And of course, maybe the first storyline with our finalists that I wanted to touch base on was the fact that we had a few second and third incarnations of the A team, which was a term that was coined back in 2012 when 1114, 2056, and 4334 were able to get together in an all-Canadian alliance. Now that alliances are 4 teams in size, it's a little bit harder to get all 4 teams being Canadian. But we had 2 in particular that had 3 Canadian members on them. One of which was the number 2 alliance on Darwin with 1114 as the captain, 610 as the first pick, 359 the Hawaiian Kids as the 3rd pick, and the Disco Bots as the 4th pick. But I wouldn't mind swinging this one over to Parth. We haven't forgotten about you, or Craig for that matter. We'll be getting to you more than soon enough as well. But Parth, with the 1114, 610, 6387 Disco Bots alliance, when I first saw that one come together, despite the fact that you were the number 2 alliance and that I knew the number 1 alliance was really, really good, I was also really, really optimistic that as far as the A-team alliances were concerned with 3, Canadian teams, you guys probably had the best shot going in Einstein. I wanted to ask you a little bit, did you guys share that optimism? And maybe, to maybe answer 2 questions. Were you optimistic going in? And the second question was that leading up to the World Championships, there was a lot of talk about 1986 being maybe the best pure shooter in the world being in the division. What the prospects were of them, 1986, Team Titanium, possibly picking 610, your team, who at that time, maybe probably still does have a reputation for being one of the best gear cyclers, if not the best gear cycler in the world, and what a devastating combination those 2 would be. So 2 questions for you. Were you optimistic about your alliance coming together, and maybe give us a little bit of insight about, the 1986 and 610 combination and how it did or did not really come together?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yes, we were very optimistic when we formed our alliance. So, I'm going to actually tackle your second question first because it leads into how our optimism sort of formed around our alliance. We actually talked to Team Titanium as early as late Friday. And, we were talking to them about possibly picking us, and our pitch was, hey, you're the best ball robot, we're the best gear robot, let's make it happen. And obviously, they weren't going to commit to anything like right away. They shouldn't. They should look at their scouting data and figure out what the best pick for them was. And to be 100% honest, I mean, Team 3310, Blackhawk Robotics, they were absolutely amazing on the field. Like if you watched any qualification matches on Darwin, they were by far one of the best robots out there. They were able to put up, not just 40 kPa, but a lot of the times 50, 60 kPa in just autonomous mode. And then they could gear like crazy. And I think the biggest upside to them was the fact that they had a floor pickup, right? So drop gears weren't the end of the world in terms of a concern. And, everyone was worried about 1986 not having a good blue autonomous mode. And Darwin was blue 3 times on Einstein. Well, why not put 3310 on, which is exactly what they did on Einstein, where 3310 ran the blue autonomous mode. And, they still managed to get their 40 kPa. So I think there's a lot of factors there, and obviously they made the right call, world finalists. I don't really think that we necessarily could have gone as far as the 1986-3310 alliance with 610 being there instead. But, we would have definitely had a lot of fun playing with Titanium. I think having 2 robots play at their ultimate level, against all these amazing alliances would have been really fun to see. But after talking to Titanium, we didn't really know where things were going to go. So we also ended up talking with 1114 as well as Blackhawk Robotics, and it was kind of the 4 of us in some permutation of an alliance. And so once we knew we were going to end up with 1114, we decided, okay, let's go through the list. So on Saturday morning, when we're sitting there and it's coming all the way back around, we were like, oh, having 359 as another shooter would be amazing. So we kind of wanted another shooter to help us balance out the KPA because we had to go up against the number 1 alliance. And then, the next team on our list was the Disco Bots, who was probably one of the the most amazing gear cyclists to come out of Ontario, especially with a rookie number. And the funny story, I think, is when we were putting our whiteboard up to both the 1114 and 610 rep on the field, both of their faces just lit up as soon as the board read 6387. Like, they were more happy on the field to read that number, and it was almost as if they were like, yeah, we were going to pick them anyway, regardless of what you said. Like, there was just so much optimism around Symbotics, Crescent, and Disco Bots Canada. Like, just three amazing robots, and then you add in the Hawaiian kids, which was, at least in our opinion, an absolute steal. So there was a great deal of optimism around the alliance.
Yeah, no, I on both those accounts, in terms of 1986 and 610 not getting together, I did watch a fair number of Darwin matches, and I have to agree, the 3310 pick was a really good pick, scouting wise, and watching them on the field. It was hard not to argue that they made the right pick, especially with the ultimate result. But it would have been cool to see you guys get together for sure. Especially with the unabashed Canadian bias that we have going on in this call. But having said that, it was really, really neat to see the three Canadian teams get together, like you said, with the Hawaiian kids, and kind of construct a really well-rounded alliance, only to be defeated in the finals by, the Ultimate World Championship finalists. But it was a really, really great run, a very impressive run nonetheless. And of course, one of the other finalist alliances with major Canadian content would have been the 4976 Rebels Alliance, along with 4678, the Cyber Cavs. And this one, if you've been paying attention in Ontario, you would have known that 4976 has been an elite level robot. Basically taking the eventual Ontario district champs right to the bitter end, matching with scores north of 500, which were, without breaking a sweat, really, and then getting the opportunity to pair them up with the Cyber Cavs, who, despite being a pretty young team, have a pretty established pedigree over the last few years. Many of us remember their incredible and downright ridiculous autonomous mode for opening up the Type C defenses with the drawbridge and the Sally port. It didn't take long to realize that these guys were going to be an elite level team for quite some time. And so, Craig, I know it's taken a little while to get to you and your insight, but I'm dying to sort of hear your perspectives, being one of the more up-and-coming teams out of Ontario, and how you guys were able to construct that alliance, and what the story was for you guys, ultimately in getting to the division finals.
Well, I appreciate, the flattering comments. It's definitely been a good season for us. We set our sights high at the beginning of the year, being a fourth-year team with a good contingent of senior students, and we really wanted to qualify for St. Louis before they graduated. So we were fortunate to have had some quality alliance partners throughout the qualification matches. And we really liked the versatility of our robot, so that made us complementary with a variety of different partners in the qualification rounds. Then came the alliance selection. We were looking for a side gear specialist, and we knew the Cavs, from the Ontario tournament. We were familiar with them and their pedigree, as you mentioned. So we were very excited to get them with our second pick, and they proved to be a huge part of the alliance. In the first elimination match, two teams from the other alliance came and played defense and kind of shut our team down completely. And I remember thinking to myself that, wow, we've been pinned down. We're going to need to catch up on gears. And I looked up, and sure enough, we had 4 rotors already about a minute into the match. And our robot had contributed maybe 1. So the Cavs were huge in picking up the slack and taking advantage of the opportunity. They proved to be a very reliable partner. In addition to 27, again, like other alliances trying to keep up in the fuel race, we knew going up against the Poofs that 40 kPa was critical. And so we made our way onto the final round and tried to be creative against the Poofs, tried to play some defense, keep them from 4 rotors. Those matches were very hard fought on both sides, lots of defense, and things got a little messy out there. And I feel like the wear and tear of the tournament, the war of attrition kind of got to us a little bit, as does happen, playing so many matches over the course of the season and so many in St. Louis. So we gave it our all and ultimately fell a little bit short to an excellent alliance.
Well, of course, that excellent alliance went on to be the eventual world champs, and so for anyone who's looking for a positive to take away from losing in the finals of your division, it's a tough pill to swallow, but to have lost to the best alliance in the world is certainly no small feat. And on top of that, just looking at the scores from the finals matches from the daily division. If you're looking in terms of some two hard-fought matches here, but compared to the scores that were on Einstein going up, you still held that strategy of playing some defense and, taking those guys out of their element, but you kept that World Championship Alliance down from their scores of over 500 on Einstein down into 355 into the 355 range, while still putting up 334 yourself. And even that number, I'm sure you guys are a little disappointed in, because that 334 was done without hitting either the 40 kPa or the 4 rotors. And what's a little crazy is if you had hit, either of those bonuses in that finals match, you would have beaten that World Championship Alliance, who, we obviously know is super talented out there. So, what a way to cap an amazing season for both the Rebels and for the Cyber Cavs. Obviously with help from 27, which was a phenomenal robot for the few matches that I had a chance to see out there. But just want to make sure everyone in Canada recognizes, the amount of work that you guys did and how close you guys were to taking out, the ultimate championships or champions of the world by playing that strategy. But that was really, really awesome, Craig, and congratulations to you and your team for your finalist performance.
Thank you.
For a few of the other finalists, there's some teams here which, I don't think come as too much as a surprise to the rest of us, but I may just want to pick the brains of a few more of our panelists here. But 4917, Sumeet, these guys, I believe, were on Curie with you guys.
Yes, they were.
But no surprise seeing these guys make it to the division finals and meeting them in the finals of that division. Was there really? Or
No, from the beginning of the playoffs, we had a feeling that they might be the ones we end up facing in the finals, just because their alliance was able to put up 4 rotors really fast, as they themselves are a really amazing gearing robot, as well as they also have the ability to shoot some KPA, which we knew from against the other alliances would make a major difference in their matches. So we weren't that surprised that we ended up facing them in the end.
Yeah, it was no surprise from my standpoint. I don't think anyone else at that point either. And with them, actually, you would have also seen 4946 as part of that alliance. I don't think there were too many surprises that they ended up on that alliance as well. You kind of have two support type shooters there, where you probably needed the combination of them to maybe get close to that 40 kPa, but a very interesting one where you don't really have either of them as elite shooters, but maybe still enough there to cause some serious damage. But any surprises with the Alpha Dogs, seeing them too up against you guys in the finals?
Not really, because as you said, they were able to shoot as well. And even though 4917 and the Alpha Dogs by themselves aren't tremendous shooters, together they have the capability of putting up the 40 kPa in some of their matches, which I believe they did in a few at least, but I could be wrong there. Yeah. But other than that, they're both also great gearing robots, so I wasn't surprised there at all.
Yeah, and regardless of whether they were able to put up that 40 kPa, I think strategically, being able to gear and get enough kPa to get past the pure gear alliances was enough to at least make it to the finals, but still a solid strategy between them. And last but not least, 865. This was a really, really interesting one, because 865 was right on the bubble to qualify for the world champs. And I'm so glad that they did, because they actually have a really strong robot. Low key, one of the best gear cyclers I've seen come out of Ontario, but they're kind of this tall, slightly tippy robot that earlier in the season was more known for its shooting, more so than its gear cycling. But, if you paid long enough attention to them, you began to realize that they were a really darn good gear cycler with a really reliable hang as well. But, they made the finals in a very kind of unorthodox way as the last pick of their alliance on Archimedes. And normally, that would have meant that they would have been the backup robot. But they were put in after the first quarterfinals match as the backup robot into their alliance, and basically subsequently, set the high score for the highest scoring matches in the Archimedes division, and basically just helped their alliance right through the finals to the finals, kind of out of nowhere with some crazy gearing support, which in all honesty, that was exactly what that alliance needed, because that alliance lost their very first quarterfinals match. 865 comes in as sort of a super sub, kind of that, it's apt because I'll use an NBA basketball analogy, that sixth man or sixth woman, whatever the case may be, to come off the bench and just be a pure offensive shooter to get you that fourth rotor. And that's precisely what they did. So it was pretty amazing to see them and to pull that one out for their alliance as playing that super sub role. But really great performance for them. I know those guys were excited just to be at the World Champs, but I won't say out of nowhere, but a great surprise to push their alliance and be a key cog into making it all the way to the division finals. Last but not least, I wanted to take a moment just to maybe pass around to the entire group of panelists. Maybe if you had any notable performances from teams that you saw at the World Championships, maybe some surprises, whether they surprised you in a positive way, or maybe some surprises in terms of teams that maybe didn't quite get picked or didn't make it despite having some really good robots. Let's swing this one over to Craig first. Craig, I think there was maybe a team or two that you might have picked up upon that showed up at champs that surprised you in some way.
Yeah, a couple teams that caught my attention and surprised me a little bit. I was pleased to see 1325 make the finals in Archimedes. Make the elimination round in Archimedes. I really thought they had a great machine at Ontario, and it was nice to see them be recognized and fight hard in their division. Another team that was a bit surprising was 5406. No surprise to me, they ranked in the top 8 and captained their alliance. A little disappointed that they didn't get further in the tournament because they had a very impressive machine, a very versatile machine, and overall, congratulations, they had a great season.
Yeah, and Parth, I'm going to swing this one over to you because I think you had a note about 1325 as well, something that we have not mentioned quite on this webinar yet.
Yeah, actually, and not just 1325, but a couple other teams as well. But I'll start with 1325. So a huge shout out and congratulations to Tanri Daliwal from Team 1325, who did win the Dean's List. I guess it's the Dean's List winner as opposed to the Dean's List finalist at the World Championship. So now she joins an elite group of students from Canada to have won that award, and I think that's awesome. I think we have amazing students in Canada without whom none of these robot performances would be possible, and it's awesome to see more Canadians get recognized for that.
Yeah, most definitely. A big shout out for Dean's List. Super amazing accomplishment there. Thanks for bringing that one up, Parth. I'm going to swing this one over to Rishi, because Rishi, I think there are some teams there who might have been some surprises for you in terms of, either making it or maybe not making it into the playoffs. But were there a few teams that came to mind there, Rishi?
Oh, for sure. So looking at my field, the two other Canadian teams were 2386 and 772. Both teams that probably a lot of people outside of Ontario wouldn't recognize. But unfortunately, they didn't make eliminations, but they were both top 20 gear scorers on our field, both averaging about 3.5 gears per match. They definitely outperformed what I thought they would coming into the event, and they should be really proud with their performance.
Yeah, and I want to tack on to that one because we've spent a lot of time talking about the Canadian teams that did make the playoffs and who did advance, far into the elimination rounds and this and that. And, obviously those are great, great, great achievements. But as I was doing my report and I was getting down to the teams who didn't make eliminations, I came across those two teams as well, 2386, 772, and another one that I'll throw out there, 5885, Villanova. These guys were ranked 10th in their division, and they didn't make the elimination rounds. And I'm not bringing this up because I'm trying to rub salt into the wounds of anyone from 5885 who might be listening, because I know that's probably a pretty bitter pill to swallow at this point. But I want to give them a massive shout out because I've been keeping my eye on them for the entire season, and even on some previous webinars, their name has come up. I think even in Windsor, when we saw just for the first time in Ontario a whole glut of 4-rotor matches coming up, or that were popping up, one thing that I noticed was that 5885 was just knocking them out like it was nothing. And so, to see them ranked 10th and not get picked for the eliminations, when Rishi says, 2386 and 772, based on their scouting, Rishi's scouting, Team Dave's scouting, they were definitely top 20 gear cyclers. I haven't done the scouting myself, but I have this feeling that 5885 and a lot of other Canadian teams were probably in that same boat, where they probably were top level gear cyclers, but for one reason or another, may not have been noticed or picked up, or just not picked for whatever the reasons might be. And they might be valid, they might not be. But 5885 was a really interesting one, because I think they're probably our most extreme case, being ranked 10th. And maybe I'll throw it out to a panelist or two. For some of us who know 5885 and have seen them or competed with or against them, maybe to help other teams to hypothesize maybe why they weren't picked. And so maybe I'll throw this out to a few panelists. If you were in a position to be able to pick 5885, is there a reason why you think that maybe they weren't? And maybe it's a tough question. Craig, I'm beating up on you on this one, but Craig, I'd be curious to know in terms of your perspective, because it might be related to even your team being a slightly younger team when it comes to picks. What factors might have played, into 5885 not being picked?
I think you hit the nail on the head there, Sean. It's the first thing that comes to mind is age, and it's certainly not an excluding factor, but it is definitely a factor when scouting teams for elimination rounds. I think you mentioned it earlier, kind of threw it out there. The first impression of the robot, the material they chose. Not that I found it to be a negative thing. I actually really enjoyed it personally. But for some teams, a primary factor in being scouted for eliminations is durability and long-term durability. You play a lot of matches in a short period of time, and that's one more thing I could see have factored into the scouting of that team.
Yeah, and I'll tack on to that one, because for those of you who haven't seen 5885, I encourage you to jump onto the Blue Alliance or wherever else you might be able to find a picture of their robot, and I'm going to maybe try and do it as I'm talking to you guys. But 5885 was that Ontario team who used predominantly copper pipe for the structural material of their robot. And so, you alluded to it, Craig, in terms of the choice of the materials on the robot. It was certainly unique. But here's the thing, when we're talking about reliability, yeah, a lot of us would look at copper as being somewhat malleable or ductile material that, if it took a hit in the wrong spot, maybe there are some reliability concerns. But, for all of us who talk about scouting data, I wish I had done it and could give you real numbers in front of me. This is, I guess, all anecdote, empirical at this point, but I don't think I saw these guys miss a match because of durability reasons or because they took a hard hit. I don't know if I saw them, miss gears or have bad matches essentially, or miss a climb. And this was really the reason why they were able to rank 10th. And here's the crazy part: they were ranked 10th in by the time qualifications were done. But I think at the end of the first day, halfway into the second day, I want to say these guys were ranked first, ahead of 2056 for a pretty significant part of the tournament were in and out of that spot. And, they were only able to achieve that ranking because of their reliability, just basically doing what they needed to do in terms of gears and climbs every single match. And so it's a little bit ironic, but perceptions are a lot in first, just as it is in real life, that I can't really shake the feeling that maybe it played a factor into it, for better or for worse. But love the robot. I love the fact that it was made out of copper. It's hard to say, though, who would or would not have chosen them, even for the members of the panel, if you were in a position to be able to pick 5885. And what if they were at the top of the list for, that next best gear cycler climber that you're looking for out of that third partner, fourth partner of your alliance? Would you have taken a flyer on them? As the last partner on my alliance, if the numbers looked good, I would have. But it's easy for me to say that in hindsight. But really interesting perspective there, Craig. I appreciate you sharing on that one. And then I think, my apologies, guys, I'm just trying to work through my notes here a little bit. But Sumeet, we haven't gone back to you yet. I think you're our last panelist to maybe identify a notable performance. Was there any teams in particular that might have caught your attention, for better or for worse?
Thinking back to it now, you mentioned 5885, which was also a very notable performer as they were in the same division as us. And gearing-wise, they were a very dominant team. And they would have made a great pick to any alliance. So from my division, that's the only team that I can really think of that should have been in the playoffs but didn't end up being in it.
All right.
I'd like to add a couple more if we have a minute or two.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Parth. Go right ahead.
Yeah, so on Darwin, Darwin had, I think, a third of all the Ontario teams, so we had a lot of Canada represented there. Huge shout-outs to Team 4939, Allspark 9, Team 1305, Ice Cubed, and Team 4525, that's Renaissance Robotics, all three of whom did actually play in the elimination rounds, but were either quarterfinalists or semifinalists, and playing up against both 4525 and 1305 in eliminations. Like, they were really hard to play against, and they really put up a good fight. And, they got 4 rotors. They were playing crazy defense on us. 1305, they got their shooting dialed in on Darwin. They were having a lot of 40 kPa matches. So, overall, I think those guys were just amazing.
Yeah, definitely. I was paying, somewhat close attention to Darwin and 1305 for sure, in terms of being that other elite Canadian shooter that really no one was talking about. 1305 was putting 30 kPa in autonomous, which rivaled some of the best shooters, maybe not the best shooters on Einstein, but the better shooters on Einstein. Some of them were still not shooting at the level that 1305 was. 1305 was definitely an elite level shooter, but not really recognized as one coming out of Ontario, which I'm going to give a small anecdote about these guys, going back to district championships. But there was a match in district championships where 1305 and 1114 played together. And what's really interesting is that it was a 4 RP match. And it's this one right here, 4 RP match. We got both the 40 kPa and the 4 rotors, scoring 344 points. And if I pull up the stats, you'll see, great qualification match. Most people from the outside would probably look at this alliance and sort of go, well, okay, 1114 was on there, so they must have shot all of the fuel. 1114 didn't shoot a single ball this entire match. The strategy guys got together, and Rishi, you were part of this match, so you know what I'm talking about, right? You guys handed off all the shooting responsibilities to 1305 for this match, while you and 1114 did all the gear cycles. And so if that isn't, just a huge confidence booster to really solidify you as one of the best shooters in the world, when 1114 basically just says, no, we're not going to shoot because 1305 should really be shooting, that's one of the highest compliments that you can probably pay. But outside of Ontario, I'm not too sure many people were paying attention to that match or knew even what happened there. So a few really neat storylines in that particular case.
One thing to add to that match too was we actually went to finish the 4 rotors without 1305 as well, because after they finished the 40 kPa, they were actually able to get the last gear. for us to get the 4 rotors. So big shout out to them for that match.
Yeah, that's crazy. So not only did they shoot every single fuel that match, they also did a gear just to pitch in. That's pretty awesome. I actually didn't know that. I wasn't paying that close attention. All right, so we're actually at the stage in our webinar where we are happy to take some questions from the audience, but actually I'm going to check. Is Mr. Paul Keenan on the call with us? Was he able to join in? Unfortunately, no. It seems like he's probably tied up as well.
I'd like to do one last thing, Sean. I know I've talked a lot, but I want to do a huge shout out to Team Control Z, or Control Z as we might say in Canada. That's the FLL team from Canada, Bayview Glen. They won the FLL Champions Award, which is the highest honor that an FLL team could receive. And so not only FRC, but also at the FLL level, Canada was very well represented in St. Louis.
Yeah, Control Z out of Bayview Glen, unbelievable. I don't think there's a higher honor their team can earn really on the FLL side than that award. And on top of that, we had Mr. Dave Ellis, the huge driving force behind the FLL program up here in Canada. He was also recognized with an award down at the World Championships as well. And so I know we haven't really focused on FLL as part of any of these webinars, but thanks, Parth, again for taking a moment to recognize Control Z and also throw Dave Ellis's name into the mix there for all the hard work that he's done to build that program here. And so we did have a few questions here, and the first one is from Christina Kirstens, and her question is, why did FIRST not spread the number of Canadian teams evenly in all divisions? And this is an interesting one, because I think I'll throw this over to the panelists as a follow-up question, which is whether that would have been a good thing or not. Did you actually prefer, the uneven distribution where some had more and some had less, or would it have been better if they were evenly distributed? But Christina, I think I'll answer your question because, officially, the teams are supposedly randomly assigned. It used to be where you would take all the team numbers going to World Championships and put them in order, and then you assign them sequentially to the fields. But I'm maybe I'm only about 85% sure of this, but I'm about 85% sure that it's now, excuse me, a randomized process where they're assigned, and so you kind of get what we get in terms of the distribution, and randomness is indeed random. So within the confines of normal distributions, we at least had a few Canadian teams in all of them, but to get them unevenly distributed like this, we might be on the edges of maybe some outlier distributions, but it didn't surprise me a whole lot. But I'd be curious to know from the panelists, would you have preferred an even distribution amongst the divisions, or did you kind of like the fact that there were a big chunk in Darwin, or not that many? I'll ask Parth first, because you were in one of the heavily loaded divisions with a huge menu of Canadian teams to choose from. Did you have a preference one way or another?
I love having as many Canadians on my division as possible. I always will. I think I'm always Team Canada all the way, and so it's always nice competing with friends. And obviously you make new friends when you go to championship, but with the level of FRC strength, I guess, in Ontario right now, especially for Steamworks, it was amazing to have teams like 1305, 4939, even 6331, another rookie team. All these teams were absolutely amazing. So if things didn't work out as well as they did for us, where we end up with 1114 and the Disco Bots, there's potential to end up with alliances where it's us and Allspark 9, or us and 1305, or even us and 4814, who was an alliance captain. And they were the team that we ended up winning the district championship with. So I think, having 1285 on our division would have even added to the level of teams on our field. And I always like that. Why not? You already know how to work with these teams. You already know everyone well. I think it can do more good than harm.
Very nice. Yeah, I think that was definitely a benefit to have as many as possible. And you gave 6331 a quick shout out, but I would be remiss just to not to tack on, just to recognize them for a huge set of awards that they won. They won the Darwin Division Rookie All-Star Award, which is massive. And on top of that, they were also the highest rookie seed at 13th. And we kind of told the unfortunate story, 58-85 being ranked 10th and not being selected for the elimination rounds. But 63-31, again, if Craig, your theory about team age is to hold water, maybe another data point here where 63-31 as a rookie team ranked 13th on Darwin and also was not selected to play in the playoff rounds, despite the fact that they won also Rookie All-Star and were the highest rookie seed as well. I'll take a moment to recognize some of the other award winners just before the end of our webinar, but I also wanted to fire this one over to Rishi, because I think Rishi, on your on your field, you had one where there were far fewer Canadian teams, and would you agree with Parth on that one, where you would have just rathered as many as possible, or was it okay with the 3? Was it a little bit more selective, or what are your thoughts?
I would have for sure loved to have as many Canadian teams as possible. I know that when we did look at our field, we were kind of disappointed with the volume, and you always want to have as many as possible just so it kind of grows the opportunity of you having qual matches with them. It's a lot more easy knowing that you know exactly how they are, as well as the limbs, just pairing up with one and making that run with someone that you've seen throughout the season.
So it sounds like there's a consensus there where at least you guys would want, the most number possible. But maybe, Rishi, I'll ask the original question, which is, if you had to choose between the random distribution like we had this year versus equally distributing them out, would you have a preference of one or the other? To either guarantee that there would be a certain number of Canadian teams, or roll the dice a little bit in the hopes that you get into a division with a higher representation?
So the Canadian drive coach part of me really wants as many as possible, but the statistics graduate of me really thinks the randomized process is probably the best way to go at it.
Yeah. All right. Well, fair enough. I think that's a pretty good one. All right. We're going to move on to the next question because I don't want to run too long on the webinar, but the next question is from Andrew James. What do you think about Team 6009's performance in their first Worlds appearance? And this is a really great question because 6009, I'm going to go to my list here, at the end of qualification rounds, they were ranked third on Curie. Not a first-year team, but a second-year team, very young team, first trip to the World Championships. They captained the third alliance. Unfortunately, we're eliminated in the quarterfinals, but I remember 6009 on previous webinars, they had a few people ask questions about, whether they were to stick with their passive gear manipulator or move to an active one. But in terms of Curie, Sumeet, this might by default go to you, considering you're our panelist here who competed on Curie, but do you have any observations about 6009 and their performance at their very first World Championships?
They played amazing. They were a very fast gear cycler, and we noticed that throughout the competition. And they were able to consistently put up the 4 rotors in their matches and be a dominating gearing robot on all of their alliances. And unfortunately, they weren't able to keep moving up in the eliminations. But I think for a second-year team, it's an amazing start, and they can only get better from here, in my opinion.
Yeah, and this is maybe one where, I think they were a victim of their own success a little bit by, you never want to say that there's such a thing as ranking too high, but in some cases there are where, based on the robot that they had, part of me thinks that they might have been able to maybe progress a little bit further along had they had a lower ranking and maybe were picked by one of the other alliances, which were maybe able to get a shooter. Because I think based on the alliance that they constructed, while it was a very good alliance, I think what was 4039 and 2609. 4039 did have some shooting capabilities, but probably not what we would call elite level shooters as well. But had they not been ranked so high, I would have said that they would have looked pretty good on your alliance as well, Sumeet, as maybe one of the third or fourth robots, but especially for a young team. But full credit to them for ranking third and taking control of their own destiny And I have to say, they probably put together the best alliance that they could in the position that they did. So full credit to them. Just an absolutely amazing experience. And for a lot of people who thought that maybe that number 3 ranking came out of nowhere, it did not come out of nowhere. Again, if I were to go back to the Ontario District Championships, and just to refresh some people's memories here, 6009 captained the number 7th alliance at the Ontario District Championships. So, I mean, if you're captaining an alliance at the Ontario District Championships, you're a pretty good team. You're up in the ranks of, the 2056s, 1114s, 4939s, Daves, 2386s, and 5036s of the world. You're not totally out of place ranking high at a division at the World Championships. They probably, outperformed even their expectations. Don't get me wrong. I'm sure they were, pleasantly surprised by their overall ranking. But to have not said that 6009 was a really, really, really good gearing robot would be a misnomer, because they were a really good gearing robot, one of the best in Ontario, as the district championships and the results there proved. But pretty amazing, and I'm glad you asked that question, Andrew. But we're going to move on to a few more questions, if I hadn't mistakenly closed my question pane. But the next one is from Soeb Nadim, who has been a webinar guest for us in the past. But Soeb asks, does being a Canadian team give you a greater chance of being picked later in the draft, especially for some of the lesser known teams? That's a very interesting one. I'm going to maybe swing this one over to Craig. Out of curiosity, do you think there's an advantage to being a Canadian team, being scooped up later in the draft? And this is a bit of a tricky one, because, I know there's a negative term that's been thrown out there in FRC called the buddy pick, where you pick someone just for being a buddy. But, I really don't think that happens, especially in Ontario. I think we have a culture here where we've had so many good, high-performing mentor teams who've really tried to set a good example in terms of using quantitative data for their selection process, where, I think when Ontario teams do pick each other, it's more so that they're picking someone who has got the quantitative numbers, but because they're from Ontario, maybe the rest of the world doesn't really know much about them, and they fly in under the radar, which gives us the advantage of that inside knowledge to sweep up these teams. But Craig, out of curiosity, from your perspective, being a Canadian team, hoping to be swept up later on in the draft, an advantage?
I think it's a huge advantage. Canada has established a brand of quality and competitive robotic teams, and I think that there's a lot of eyes on us. You hear about people talking about us on Fun and the Canadian Top 25. There's a lot of attention on Canadian robotics teams, and I think that's a good thing. I think that it definitely is an advantage. I've heard about the rumors of the buddy pick, and I think I would liken it more to a familiarity pick. So being that there is quite a contingent of Canadian teams in the top 10, as you pointed out earlier, I think that there's a familiarity there from our districts and from our provincial district championships. So we have a wider pool of scouting data, and it gives us the ability to have some insight on some very good Canadian teams.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's exactly how the rest of us see it as well. So, and the nice thing is that it really does feel like the quality of those Canadian teams has been steadily improving, and maybe even over this past year, we saw maybe a bigger step than normal, given that our teams in Ontario in particular had the opportunity to do 2 district events and the district championships before getting to the World Championships. It felt like we were better prepared as a whole to play this game at the higher stages, regardless of what kind of robots we had. Whether if we showed up with just a gear and a climber, a gear manipulating robot and a climber, it seemed like our teams knew exactly what they were supposed to do with that robot in order to make it as far as they possibly could. And, even that knowledge outside of the robot, but, knowing teams know how to maximize the robot strategically, I think is something that our jurisdiction is gaining a good reputation for. And, so to circle back, like being Canadian is one thing, but I think it's because the Canadian teams, have all those things that Craig was talking about, that's really what gives them the advantage. It's not just being Canadian, but it just so happens that we're in Canada. Our culture amongst our teams tends to revolve around all those things, so we tend to be strong at, not just building the robots, but knowing what to do with them once it comes time to play this game at a high level. And so, I don't think you're going to get too many people disagreeing with you on this panel. My apologies, guys, but we've gone over time just a little bit. We've taken a few of your questions, but I need to wrap things up and just give one quick note because, again, this is the very last webinar of the season. I wanted to thank everyone for tuning in over the last few weeks. And on a more personal note, this is also going to be my last webinar with First Robotics Canada. For those of you who've known, I have indeed been the Director of District Implementation for this past season. This role in this project is a one-year project, and my term with First Robotics is coming to an end in the not too distant future. And so I wanted to thank everyone for being a part of these webinars. I've really enjoyed doing them. And it'll be sad to see you guys go, but my tenure with First Robotics is coming to an end. But to thank everyone for both tuning in and for all of the panelists who've taken their time and have shared their expertise and talents with us. I just want to let you guys know that the feedback that we've gotten from these webinars from our teams, both young and veteran teams, in terms of just helping them shape their decision-making process and how they're running their teams and how they're designing their robots and forming their strategies on the field. Excuse me. It's always been amazing to see Canadians in particular and our elite level teams so open and willing to share their expertise and essentially their secrets with the rest of the community. I think it's one of the biggest reasons why we've been able to see the success that we have. And these webinars have really been a great avenue to be able to try and share all that information. So I wanted to thank everyone who's been involved, including tonight's panelists, and to wish you guys all the best in your continued FRC journeys. Have yourselves a great one, and best wishes now and in the future. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Sean.
Thanks, Sean.